stands, though the hills may tumble. The Bible stands, though the earth may shatter and crumble. I will plant my feet on its sure foundation, though all around is sinking sand. The Bible stands.
Turn back in your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 2. Nehemiah chapter 2, as we continue the study of rebuilding the walls in our series of starting a church and maintaining the church. As we saw in previous messages in dealing with this, the walls of protection are submitting to the authorities that are over us, and in doing so, that gives us those walls of protection. And using Nehemiah as a great illustration in dealing with walls coming down and rebuilding the walls. We saw in the first chapter the cause of the walls coming down, the issues that were taking place, and now Nehemiah is to the point where he realizes what's needing to be done in order to rebuild these walls of protection for the house of God there at the temple. So Nehemiah chapter 2, beginning of verse 1, and it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before me, and I took up the wine and gave it to the king. And I had not been before time sad in his presence. Wherefore the king said unto me, Why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of the heart. Then I was very sore afraid. Real quick, he's not real happy, and king asked him what's wrong with him. Well, all the king had to say and say, hey, if you're not happy to work with me, we can solve that now. And it wasn't that he was going to fire him; he was probably going to kill him. So he was afraid to kind of reveal what was going on. But in verse 3, he said unto the king, Let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad when the city, the place of my father's sepulchre, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said to me, For what dost thou make request? So I prayed to God in heaven. I said unto the king, If it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me to Judah, unto the city of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, For how long shall thy journey be, and when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Moreover, I said unto the king, If it please the king, let letters be given me to the governors beyond the river, that they may convey me over till I come into Judah. And a letter unto Ashford, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertaineth to the house, for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of God upon me. So here's the story. He's saying, look, I'm sad because the city, the place of my heritage is burnt down. There's no walls of protection. He said, I'd like to be able to, if it's okay with you, to go back and rebuild it, to put things back the way it's supposed to be, to reestablish these walls, to put things back. And if you would, give me letters so that I can go, protected, so that there's not going to be those that will attack me and keep me from going there. And give me the protection that I need in order to be able to accomplish this task. Well, I'm just going to stop right here. This is one of the things. When we submit to the authorities that are over us, and those who are in authority give us the ability to be able to do the jobs that we're supposed to do, there's an avenue of protection. There's a realm of look, I'm doing what I've been given permission or been given instructions to do from the person who has the authority to do that. That's why serving God, we really can serve him with strong faith, but also with confidence. Because we can simply say, look, if God's telling me to do this, I'm just doing what God wants me to do. He's big enough, and he has the authority enough to be able to sit there and say, hey, look, he's telling me to do this. This is what I'm going to do. We don't have to fear those things, as the Bible says, that will touch the body. Why? Because God's in control of all these things. So the fact is we begin to understand that he was simply coming, Nehemiah was coming to the king and saying, look, I'm going to go under your authority. I'm going to do this with your blessing, with your ability. So he sent him with these letters, verse 9. And then he came to the governors beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. There was some protection there. I mean, he sent them with an army. It's interestingly enough, sometimes we miss this when we study Nehemiah. The king sent him with an army. He had protection. He had the king's army with him. This was nothing to be laughed at. This is the empire, the army that was sent with him. You know, it reminds me of the story of the Bible that deals with the prophet of God, who the enemy had surrounded him. It seemed not bother him, but his servant was sitting there going, you know, you do see the army out there that's about to come in and take us, because, you know, they're out to get us. They're out to get you. You're going to die. And he simply prayed, or the prophet prayed a simple prayer, to have the servant's eyes open. When the eyes of the servant were open, he began to see out over the mountaintops and all around the city the angels and the chariots of fire. He began to see there's a greater army out there protecting us. We're just simply doing what God tells us to do. Again, that idea of protection is there. So he had all this going for him. But in verse 10, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant of the Ammonite heard of it, they heard of what was going on. So in other words, they heard the story. They heard that Nehemiah was coming. They heard that he had come with letters from the king. He heard that he'd come. They had the armies with him. He heard that they had heard that the fact that he had the ability to go get the timber and everything that they needed to be able to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. These men, it says, it grieved them exceedingly. Now, when you look at it, if you read it very quickly here, it seemed to be that the grieving part of it really was on those two. They began to grieve. But in the structure of this, and when you look in the Hebrew, it was the fact that they were, if you will, doing the grieving. Let me rephrase that. They were going to make sure everybody else was grieving over this. They were going to cause some problems here. The word grieved here, the root of this word, means to spoil. You know, when an army would go in and destroy a city, they would spoil the city. They would take all the good stuff. The idea here is they're going to go in and take all the good stuff. But if you get into the understanding, sometimes we have a word and we know the actual definition of the word, but in society when it is used, you kind of have a different, as used as kind of a connotative meaning to it. It has a double meaning to it. Well, the understanding of this word meaning here has a root of showing yourself friendly to then cause affliction. The fact is these guys were going to go in and pretend to be friendly, but they were going to spoil this. They were going to cause grief, and they were going to take all the good away from this. There was an intention from day one. From as soon as they heard, they had intention. And it says that there was come a man to seek welfare of the children of Israel. They were looking at it in a way in which they were messing things up. That all these people are just coming. They're here to disrupt things. So what we're going to do is disrupt it back. The idea of the welfare of the children, they really were not understanding what was really happening. Nehemiah was coming to cheer them up. He was to give them some things that was going to be a benefit to them. But Sanballat and Tobiah were going to have nothing to do with this. Verse 11, so I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. And I arose in the night, and some men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. Interesting enough, I mean, they had to have known the whole point of when he comes with this army and he comes with the things to be able to rebuild the wall. They had to have known what he was doing. So when he says here, he hadn't really told anybody what God was dealing with his heart. In the story here, the idea was he was rebuilding the walls, the actual walls. But boy, there was more to it than that. It wasn't about just building the walls around a city. What did God had led him to do? When we go back to verse 1, chapter 1, you look in chapter 1, it was the fact that the children of Israel need to repent. They need to turn around. And we saw in that word, that the idea of that word was they need to retreat from the battle that they're in and be willing to surrender. Why? Because they were fighting against God. So he was going to rebuild the walls, but the issue here was not just rebuilding the walls, it was getting God's people to turn around. It was going to come in, boy, that was going to be the bigger task. You can rebuild a wall by just getting some people that know how to do construction. But to deal with the people who have rebelled against God, he knew, boy, there's a bigger picture than just rebuilding a wall. So he went out to look at the things. He didn't tell anybody really what was in his heart. Verse 13, and I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, into the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain, into the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then I went up by night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. So he went out at night and began to walk around a different place and realized, boy, I can't even make it around here. There's no place for even, the donkey or whatever the animal that he was riding. You can't even get through this mess. It is utter destruction. And he began to go see, and if we had the time to study, he went to the different points of the city. He went to the different areas which were prominent in where the gates were and the structure, and, if you will, kind of mapping it out. Saying, getting the footage and distance and getting all the figures in his head, went to all the different places there. Verse 16, the rulers knew not whither I went or what I did, neither had I told yet as to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor the nobles, nor the rulers, nor the rest that did the work. Then said I unto them, ye see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come, let us build up the walls of Jerusalem, that will be no more a reproach. He finally comes, after doing all the math, kind of looking it over, he finally comes to them all and says, look, we need to rebuild the walls. We need to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. You can see the devastation. You can see it. And who is he talking to? Well, he's talking to the priests, the nobles, the rulers, and the rest of them that were there. That means these people lived there. Now imagine you're living in a place in which all you see around you, you wake up every day and you walk outside and you see destruction. I look back at these people and I'm going, what did they do? I mean, you and I get up every day, we go do our job, we go do the things that we do every day, we do things around the house, we do things in the neighborhood, we go to the grocery store, we go, different places. We live our life and we see the things that are around us and we do these things. What did they do? I mean, he's sitting here talking about the priest. Well, the temple has been left in ruin. The city is left in ruin. What did the priests do all day? I mean, what did they do? What was their occupation? Well, you say, well, they're priests. Well, who were they priesting over? What were they doing? The nobles. I mean, nobles. It's kind of hard to picture someone who is noble in a city that is left in destruction. What do you do for the rulers? Ruling over what? It's just utter destruction. There seems to be nothing here, and the people that are there. So he's walking into some people who they're living their lives. They're just going day in and day out and saying, hey, this is normal. How many times in churches do we walk in and we just sit there and say, you know what? Yeah, things aren't the way they used to be. Things aren't as, the church isn't as, impactful and doing all these things like it used to be. They've just gotten now used to the destruction. Well, that's just the way things are now. But hey, we're still showing up every day. We're still going to church every week. We're still doing whatever it is that we need to do here. Yeah, we see the destruction, but hey, that's the norm. I mean, isn't it like that everywhere? I mean, you're in this church, you go join another church, you go to a different church, it's all the same. I mean, it's just the way things are now. It's just the way things, and that's the way it's supposed to be now. I mean, hey, it's never going to be like it used to be, type idea. Well, that's where these people were at. And he says, let's rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. He says, let's build the walls of Jerusalem. He didn't say, let's build them so that we can, fight against the armies that are out there. Why? Well, who's their enemy? Well, you would think their enemy would be the empire. You would think it'd be the king that Nebuchadnezzar came from. Well, he just brought the army with him. That wasn't the enemy. It wasn't like Jerusalem was going to be rebuilt so that they can create a rebellion against the empire. That wasn't what was Nehemiah's plans at all. He didn't see that that was necessary, because the enemy was not the king that was over there in Assyria. It wasn't the enemy. The enemy was Satan. That's why he says here, we're going to build it that we be no more reproach. That idea of the reproach there is the fact that, oh, you say you serve God? Look at his city. Look at his temple. It was about establishing the fact that Nehemiah knew who his enemy was, and it wasn't the king that he was the cupbearer for. In fact, the enemy, all the way back in Daniel's day, was not Nebuchadnezzar. The enemy was Satan, and they allowed Satan to come in and allow them to get away from the true and living God. God just simply says, hey, when you turn against me, I'm going to send you captive. I'm going to scatter you abroad. I'm not going to allow you to be able to continue doing what you're doing, because you're just going to become a reproach. So he sits there and says, look, we're going to change this. Verse 18. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's words that he had spoken unto me. He simply says, look, this has got to be of God, because the king has given me everything that I needed to rebuild the walls. That's not normal. God simply says, look, we're going to rebuild the walls. We're going to do some things in some extraordinary ways. The church, if the walls are down, you seem like the church is in utter chaos. Well, the walls are down. God's going to do something miraculous in order to get those walls back up. That's his intention. So he simply says to them, and they said, let us rise up and build. The word rise up here, the root of that idea is to stir up and strengthen. Let's rise up and build. The idea of build here is to make or repair something. But it's interesting, again, the phrase or the terminology here had an understanding in their society in that day. Again, that kind of a connotative meaning was here, is to obtain children. When I studied this and began to look at this, and this idea of the root word there is to obtain children, that was really an idea, a concept of dealing with those who were without parents, orphans, if you will, adopted, bringing into the family. There's several ways you can build your family. You can have lots of children, or you can get lots of children. Either way you go, you're going to build that family. So the idea here, when he says, let's rise up, let's encourage one another, let's get the energy that we need, and let's rebuild this. The idea was not just to do a construction work, but it is to bring in those and add to the family. There was a spiritual aspect of this that they begin to start understanding. Our job as the children of Israel was to give the word of God and the truth of God's word and his salvation to the whole world, and we haven't been doing it. So we need to rise up and build so that this message can go out. So it says to rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands. The word strengthen there is to seize with urgency, to grab a hold of urgency. So when they're going to build up their strength, it is something that they were going to latch onto and not let go of. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But here we go, verse 19. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn. When you try to stand up for what's right, you try to rebuild the walls. Church, if you're sitting there going, look, we got to turn things around here. We've gotten away from God. We've got to do what's right. We're going to get a hold of the Word of God, and we're going to stand and we're going to do what's right. We're going to rebuild these walls. We're going to start reteaching and preaching the fact that, hey, we need to submit to the God-given authorities. We need to put the structure back in place. We need to put all the bricks back in place the way they need to be. This is what we need to do. Be prepared, because there are going to be those in your midst. Because remember, these people were these guys are the ones that have been living there. These guys are from this area. These are the ones that are there day in and day out. So it's not like this is opposition coming from someone far, far away. These are people they deal with every day. And it says, and they laughed us to scorn. The idea here is the idea to mock. But it's interesting, again, that root word, that root meaning, and that understanding that they had, I found was interesting. It meant to speak unintelligibly as if imitating a foreign language. Now, have you ever met somebody who, barely speaks their own language, let's say English well, and then a foreigner comes up and starts speaking some other language, and they, in their mind, think that's kind of funny. And so they begin to mock them by kind of using the accent and maybe throwing out words that aren't really words in their language. Maybe making fun of the Spanish language or French language or the German language or the Russian language, or pick a language, Chinese, pick whatever language and they speak unintelligibly. There's no real words there. They're just making fun of them. So what was happening here was these people were making fun of, they laughed us to scorn, making fun of, if you will, probably Nehemiah's accent. Now, was Nehemiah speaking fluent Hebrew? Chances are no. Why? Because he was taken captive as a little kid, taken to a foreign land, and had lived there his entire life. Good chances are he picked up on the dialect of the land that he was at. So when he came back, I'm sure he had learned some Hebrew. Obviously, with what was going on at the time, he would have had exposure to different languages and stuff, being right there at the king. All the different languages of the world would be coming to the king. So he probably had picked up some. He may have had, hey, I'm heading back, so let me gain some things. He probably picked up on some of the Hebrew language. They were making fun of him, saying, oh, you think you're a Hebrew, you can't even speak the language right. Making fun of him the way he spoke. So they laughed him to scorn, and the Bible says, and despised us. Well, the idea there of this despise is disdain this person. But the root word here is dealing with a physical action. So not only they despise him, it wasn't just with words. If you will, I can almost picture there was some shoving. Who do you think you are? Get out of here. There was some physical contact here. Now, remember, here's Nehemiah. He's come. He has the army with him. Yet these guys made fun of the way he talked and literally would just go and kind of push on him, saying, look, who do you think you are? You need to get out of here. This was personal. This was not something that was done, behind the scenes somewhere else. If you're going to try to stay in the church and you're going to try to rebuild the walls and you're going to sit there and say, we're going to submit to the authorities God's given us. We're not going to allow things to go this way. We're going to get out of this corruptness. We're going to get out of this way of thinking. There's going to be people thinking, who do you think you are? Man, you're trying to act spiritual. You're trying to talk like that preacher. You're trying to act like him. You're trying to butter up to the preacher. And they'll make fun of your talk and saying, oh man, you're just speaking like the preacher speaks. You just talk. Who do you think you are? You ain't the preacher. Even to the point where they may come up to you and say, hey, you just get out of here. This is our church. Don't be disrupting us. That's exactly what's happening here. They're wanting to do a good work. And these guys are sitting there going, get out of here. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just talking all funny. And really almost to the point of just pushing them away. Get out. This is what was taking place. This is what you can picture in your mind. This is what Nehemiah was up against. And they said, what is this thing that you will do? What do you think you're going to do? You think you're going to be able to fix all this stuff? Who do you think you are? People in the church, if you try to stand what's right, you're going to have people sitting there going, man, what do you think you're doing? Come on. This isn't the way we do things around here. Quit getting off. What, you think you're going to change things? You think you know better? Then it says, will you rebel against the king? it is amazing. The people that will accuse you of what they are most guilty of. These people had no regard for the king, but they're going to quickly try to make it look like, hey, you are rebelling against the king and trying to do this thing. You go, church, I don't know how many times I've heard people, when you sit there and you go into the church and you try to fix some of these problems, say, look, we're going to turn this thing around. You need to start submitting to the authorities that God's putting over your life. And immediately they will start saying that, going, oh, so you think you know better than the preacher that's been here, so you're going to disrupt the preacher. You're going to, boy, you're not doing what needs going on. I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard people that they were being attacked. Well, you're just trying to disrupt what's going on here, with the idea that they were the ones that were going to rebelling against the pastor of the church. In reality, it was the totally opposite. This is exactly what's going on here. They could care less about the king, but yet they were rebelling against the king, but they're going to accuse Nehemiah of doing the same thing. Be prepared for being accused of being not submissive to authority from people who are not submissive to authority. It's going to happen. All you're trying to do is a good work of rebuilding the walls, and you are going to face opposition. But verse 20, then answered I them, and said unto them, the God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build. But ye have no portion, no right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Let me tell you, here is a huge statement being made here. He said, God has given us this instruction. We are his servants. We are simply doing what God tells us to do. We're going to follow what God tells us to do in order to get this built, get the walls of protection back up. Church, God has instructed us to get the walls built back up. We're going to submit to the authorities. We're going to be his servants. We're going to do what God tells you to do. And if you're not going to be a part of this, if you're not going to submit to the authorities, if you're not going to submit to God's plan, here's his response to them. You have no portion, nor right, nor memorial here. In other words, if you're not going to be a part of the solution to fix the church, you don't have a part of this. You're not a part of this, which means you need to leave. You have no right. Don't sit there and say, hey, I have a right to say what I want to say. If you're not going to follow God in the church, you have no right. You're not given a special right to be able to say whatever you want to say. You have no right. And then it says you have no memorial. Interesting. You can't sit there and say, I lay claim to this because of our heritage or foundation. Most will sit there and say, hey, look, I have a right to say what I want to say in the church because my parents are buried out there in the graveyard. My grandparents are buried in the graveyard. My great-grandparents are there, and their parents have started this church, so I have the right to say. He's saying you have no memorial. Why? Because the memorial is not about a human heritage. The memorial is about a spiritual heritage. You have no portion of here because your spiritual foundation isn't found here. If you're rebelling against God and God's authority and you're not going to do this thing, you have no memorial. You cannot point to a point where you sit there and say, hey, this is my church, here's my heritage, because your heritage would be submission to God, submission to his authority. So he's just simply telling them, you have no place here. You have no rights here. And you have no heritage here, which means you need to leave. One of the hardest things to deal with the church, if you're going to deal with cleaning up the church and getting the walls right, is you're going to have to sit there and look at the people who are not going to be a part of the building and who are not going to be a part of submitting to this. You're going to have to sit there and say, you have no portion here, you have no rights here, you have no heritage here, you need to leave. That's not going to be easy to do. But if you're going to get these walls up, you got to clean that out. We've talked about this in Titus and Timothy. You got to get them out. You can't let them stay. If they're not going to submit to this, what the Bible is teaching, what God's teaching, you're going to have to stand up and say, you need to get out. Not an easy thing to do, but a must if you're going to rebuild the wall.
Though all around is sinking.